My stallion Windrift is the oldest of all the horses that we got out of the latest muster. He's a mature stallion from Zone 20, which is a restricted area in the Kaimanawa ranges where live firing happens. So because of this, humans can't sort of enter this zone and the horses are far less habituated, and in Windrift's case particularly flighty. Going back through old photos, obviously I can't go into Zone 20 when I'm in the Kaimanawa ranges, but I have got a photo of some horses in Zone 20 taken from the border, and if you zoom in, they're just little specks in the distance, and in one I can just see that little white circle on Drifter's nose, and long shots in there too. So even though I actively don't remember seeing them in the wild, I obviously did at some point because I do have that photo, which it makes it even more special. Several days after Windrift arrived, I actually realised that he was documented in the Kaimanawa database, which is an online sort of platform where horses are recorded. And initially I hadn't thought to look him up because horses from Zone 20 are so rarely documented, but I put in his markings and came up with a match, and he actually had been named Drifter in the Windrift Drifter in the KHH database because his band had been named after military sniper terms, because although they were obviously a cohesive band, when they grazed they scattered and drifted apart. So there was a stallion called Drifter, Fracture, Scatter, and then obviously Longshot, which is Morgan's stallion, one of my interns, was part of this band as well. And so it was really interesting seeing the dynamics and knowing that these two stallions lived together in the wild with mares and foals as well. And they were great friends initially. They were yarded together and quite happy about it. But as time's gone on, they've actually not been so tolerant of each other and are now separated because they seem to always end up in scraps when they're together. So when he first arrived from the muster, it was several days before we could even start working with him, because just walking down the alleyway between the yards he would panic and start crashing into fences. It was quite stressful watching him, just seeing how stressed he was by being in close proximity to humans and then also captive in yards. So when we first started bringing him into the round yard, which is a 15-metre space, he was very, very sort of stressed by being in a new environment and the fact that we were quite close. And so it was a few more days before I was able to go through the gateway and stand in the yard with him, just because even being in a yard that size was overwhelming. So by the time I got Windrift to the point where I could enter his yard and start working with him, it was actually more a case of him taming himself than me doing much work, because he was so switched on and attentive to the slightest movement from me. I just stood in the gateway. As I stood there, he would become curious, creep closer, scare himself, spin away, and just time and time again repeat this until he got to the point where he was actually just a couple of meters away from me. And although he was much flightier and more worried than my other stallion Conquistador, he actually started reaching milestones quicker because he had this really natural curiosity, even though he was very fearful, and he really gave 110% to everything asked of him. So by the time he got right close to me, he'd reach out and sniff my hand, he'd take grass from my hand, and then he got to the point where I could hold out my hand and he'd bring his forehead close, mirroring it, and then reach down and just bump my hand. So those milestones sort of happened in the first couple of weeks, and then gradually things changed, so that rather than on his timing, when he decided he wanted to touch me, it started evolving to my timing and me wanting to get to the point where I touched him. And so we first got touches on the head and then touches on either side of the neck, and then he got to the point where he was so confident that he was able to be halted in the round yard at Liberty, which was really, really fantastic. And at that point he had quite a good Liberty foundation, so he could work over obstacles. He'd come out into this large grass paddock and cross a small jump and wall over carpet and pieces of plywood, and he really was starting to develop key components to his training, like hindquarter yields, that made the haltering process really simple when he got to that point. So he's been a pretty phenomenal horse to work with, and just really, really stoked that I've had the opportunity to work with a horse like him. When he started his training, I couldn't even be in this area, and he was at such high alert that it was so stressful for me to even be outside the yard. Good, there. So that was the first time on my attempts to touch him on the forehead where he actually allowed me into the space without raising his head to give that safety stop, which is a sign of tension for him, that he's uncomfortable and trying to block that touch. So I'm going to get another really good answer on the head, and then we're going to move on to the neck, which is what this session, hopefully, there, blocking, repeating straight away. Good, that was cute. Really nice, a real moment of stillness where he pushed against my hand, but still raising that head. So what I'm looking for to finish working on that forehead is the absolute relaxation, which is shown by him not needing to raise his head and intercept me. So I'm just going to keep my hand here. So this is the evolution of the question. Good. Which is, rather than backing away on every good attempt, maintaining the question until he allows me into that space. So there's a little bit of confusion here for him because I haven't raised my expectations to this. Oh, good boy. Haven't raised my expectations to that degree where if he gives me an average answer, I'm actually persisting and waiting for a really correct answer. I'm here with Windrift. He's had about 30 days of training and has got to the point where he's had a couple of days of first touches, something that we always sort of build up and work towards over a session. And now he's just had 3 days off. So he's a little bit more sort of weary and snorty than normal, but really cool that he's coming up behind me. So I'm just going to start by offering him some bailage as a hello, and then see if we can repeat that first touch on the forehead. So he's really good about offering a safety stop where he kind of bumps his nose into my hand as a way of showing tension. So he's been taught to engage with what he's scared of, but he sort of intercepts the forehead touch by bringing his nose up to let me know he's worried. So I'm really, really hoping that he can get to the point where allowing the hand on his forehead is just a default answer, one that he doesn't need to be stressed about, because at the moment there's still stress about that initial contact. So this guy is very, very flighty about many, many things, and he drastically changed his behaviour about 2 to 3 weeks into his training. He was very flighty anyway, but then he also got quite a lot of fight pre-indicators showing up, and often that's a sign of ulcers. So he's about to start ulcer treatment, not a medical ulcer treatment because obviously he can't be handled, but natural products that can be put onto fresh grass in his yard. So we'll pull fresh grass, add the products, and hopefully that will help settle him so that the touching isn't such a big deal, because often first touch they can be super hypersensitive to any contact of their skin, and also they can show a really sour disposition or even aggression. So we're going to give this guy the benefit of the doubt, see if we can help him out a bit, and then worry about first touches once he's 2 weeks into that. Because he's offering it, I might just take that, because the last session I worked at Liberty was crossing the plywood and he's only ever done it once. So I'll let him know he's done a great job there. Gosh, you're cute. So you can see things that aren't to do with touch are really like developing with this horse, and that's often the case with horses with ulcers. You can do obstacles, you can lead them if they're halted, you can do a lot of things, and the one thing that's difficult is being touched. So you are so cool. Well, that's really awesome. He really loves the sessions that aren't working on touching. But obviously to help him and get the oral medication into him for the ulcers, we do have to develop the touch in a timely fashion. But there are a few natural products like Tough Rock GI and Maxia Digest that I'm hoping are able to sort of fast track him enough